the first solo above-the-title African-American movie star. He was unique.
Sidney Poitier.
Sidney Poitier did something in Hollywood no one dared to do. He refused their rules, shattered stereotypes, and became the first black man to win an Oscar for Best Actor. But behind the glamour was a man who risked his life, faced death threats, and even carried cash to fund dangerous civil rights missions. What made him do it? And how did he pull it off? The full story will shock you, inspire you, and leave you speechless. Sidney Poitier was born on February 20th, 1927, in Miami, Florida, 2 months earlier than expected. His parents, Evelyn and Reginald James Poitier, were Bahamian farmers who had traveled to Miami to sell tomatoes. They hadn't planned for Sidney to be born in the U.S., but his early arrival changed everything. He was so small and fragile that his survival seemed uncertain. His parents stayed in Miami for 3 months, doing everything they could to help him recover. This unexpected American birth turned out to be important later in his life, as it made him a U.S. citizen and opened doors for him in ways no one could have imagined. Sidney spent his early years on Cat Island, a quiet and remote part of the Bahamas. The island had no electricity, and life there was simple but tough. His family grew tomatoes on their small farm, relying on these crops to earn a living. They often sailed to Miami to sell their produce. Life on the island shaped Sidney's character, teaching him resilience and independence. Although the isolation of Cat Island meant he didn't face the racial discrimination common in mainland America, life wasn't easy. His family struggled to make ends meet, and Sidney had to leave school at age 12 to help support them. When Sidney was about 10 years old, his family moved to Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas. This was a big change for him. Nassau was much busier and more developed than Cat Island. His father stopped farming and started working as a taxi driver to support the family. It was in Nassau that Sidney first discovered movies, sparking a love for storytelling and acting. However, the move also brought challenges. For the first time, Sidney encountered racism, though it was different from what he would face later in the U.S. Life in the city wasn't easy, and Sidney started getting into trouble. Worried about his behavior, his father decided to send him to Miami to live with his older brother. At 16, Sidney left Miami for New York City with just $3 in his pocket, hoping for a better life. Things didn't go as planned. Soon after arriving, he was robbed of most of his money and had to sleep in bus stations and on rooftops to survive. New York winters were brutal, and without warm clothes, Sidney was desperate. He lied about his age to join the army, thinking it would be a way out. But military life didn't suit him, and he faked mental illness to get discharged. When Sidney Poitier arrived in Harlem at 16, he had barely any money and a thick Caribbean accent that made him stand out. Hoping to pursue acting, he auditioned for the American Negro Theater. But the experience was humiliating. With only 2 years of formal schooling, he struggled to read, and his accent didn't help. Frederick O'Neill, the theater's owner, stopped him after just one line and dismissed him. This rejection was painful, but instead of giving up, Poitier turned it into motivation. Living in poverty, sleeping in bus stations and on rooftops, he worked as a dishwasher. During his shifts, he practiced reading with newspapers and listened to radio news anchors, mimicking their pronunciation to improve his diction. For 6 months, he worked tirelessly to neutralize his accent and improve his literacy. Poitier's determination led him back to the American Negro Theater, but this time with a clever plan. He noticed they didn't have a janitor and offered to clean the theater for free in exchange for acting lessons. The instructors didn't believe in him at first, but he refused to give up. He spent his days cleaning and his nights studying the actors. Often, he stayed late, watching rehearsals and learning techniques from more experienced performers. He continued working as a dishwasher to support himself, pouring every spare moment into improving his craft. Slowly, his persistence began to pay off. In 1946, Poitier met Harry Belafonte at the theater. Both were 20, shared Caribbean roots, and faced similar struggles, forming a lifelong bond. Their friendship deepened over time, extending beyond acting into activism. Poitier's first big break even came because of Belafonte. When Belafonte fell ill before a performance, Poitier stepped in as his understudy. That night, a Hollywood producer in the audience noticed him, changing his life forever. Years later, the two friends would risk their lives together during the Civil Rights Movement, including a dangerous mission to Mississippi in 1964. That same year, Poitier's persistence landed him a role in the Broadway production of Lysistrata. It was groundbreaking, featuring an all-black cast. On opening night, Poitier forgot his lines, but his charm and presence won over the audience and critics. The play didn't last long, but it gave him important exposure. Soon after, he was cast in Anna Lucasta, another all-black production that became the theater's first major Broadway success. The play toured the country, giving Poitier valuable experience and setting the stage for his film career. In 1950, at just 22, Poitier made his film debut in No Way Out. He played Dr. Luther Brooks, a young black doctor treating a racist white criminal, portrayed by Richard Widmark. The film didn't shy away from racial violence, which made it controversial. It was banned in Chicago and across much of the South. In the Bahamas, where Poitier was from, British colonial authorities also banned it, fearing it might spark unrest. Ironically, this censorship led to protests that fueled the independence movement in the Bahamas. No Way Out was groundbreaking, showing a black character as a dignified professional for the first time in mainstream American cinema. Poitier's performance was powerful and marked the start of his legendary film career. At 27, Sidney Poitier had his big break in the film Blackboard Jungle, 1955. Even though he was much older than a high school student, he played one convincingly. The movie caused a stir because of its bold themes and the use of Bill Haley and his Comets song Rock Around the Clock, which became a youth anthem. Despite the backlash, the film was a huge success, making over $8 million, a big number in those days. Years later, in 2016, it was added to the National Film Registry for its cultural importance. In 1958, Poitier made history again with The Defiant Ones. It told the story of two escaped prisoners, one black, one white, who were chained together. It was groundbreaking, as director Stanley Kramer gave Poitier equal billing with his co-star, Tony Curtis, which was unheard of for a black actor at the time. It was nominated for 8 Oscars and won 2. Poitier himself became the first African American to be nominated for Best Actor. A scene where his character slapped a white man back was shocking in 1958, but also revolutionary. Today, the film still holds up, with a 91% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. In A Raisin in the Sun, 1959 to 1961, Poitier played a key role in a story that changed American theater. It was hard to get funding for the play at first because it had a mostly black cast, but it finally premiered on Broadway in 1959 and ran for 530 performances. The story focused on a black family facing housing discrimination in Chicago, and its impact was so strong that it's considered a turning point in American theater. When the film version was made in 1961, the entire Broadway cast reprised their roles, preserving the original performance. Poitier earned a Golden Globe nomination, and his co-star Ruby Dee won the National Board of Review Award for Best Supporting Actress. In 1963, Poitier made history again with Lilies of the Field. He became the first African-American to win the Academy Award for Best Actor. He played Homer Smith, a handyman who helps a group of German nuns build a chapel in the Arizona desert. What made the role unique was that it didn't focus on race, which was rare for films of that time. The movie was made on a very small budget of just $240,000, but ended up earning $7 million. It received 5 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. In 1967, Sidney Poitier made history with 3 iconic films that dominated Hollywood and earned over $75 million at the box office. At 40 years old, he became the first African-American actor to top the year's box office rankings. One of the most unforgettable moments in Poitier's career came in The Heat of the Night. In a tense scene at a plantation, Poitier's character, Virgil Tibbs, confronts a wealthy plantation owner about a murder. The owner slaps Tibbs across the face, and Tibbs immediately slaps him back. This scene shocked audiences in 1967, showing a black man standing up to racism in a way that was rarely seen on screen. Director Norman Jewison faced challenges filming this iconic moment. Despite his promise to Poitier not to film in the Deep South, they shot the scene in Tennessee, and Poitier took precautions, even sleeping with a gun under his pillow for safety. Jewison coached the actors carefully, ensuring the slap felt real but not overdone. They completed the scene in 2 takes, using the first because of its raw, genuine impact. The moment resonated far beyond the screen. Nelson Mandela later said it inspired him during his imprisonment. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Poitier tackled another groundbreaking role. The film was released just months after the Supreme Court's Loving versus Virginia decision, which legalized interracial marriage in the U.S. When production began, interracial marriage was still illegal in 17 states. To make the story more acceptable to audiences of the time, Poitier's character, Dr. John Prentice, was portrayed as a nearly perfect man, an accomplished doctor working with the World Health Organization who upheld the highest moral standards. Even with this careful framing, the film faced strong backlash. Poitier and his co-star Catherine Houghton received death threats, and many theaters in the South refused to show the film. Despite this, it was a massive success, grossing over $25 million. In Two Sir with Love, Poitier played Mark Thackeray, a teacher in London's East End. The story, based on E.R. Braithwaite's autobiographical novel, flipped traditional racial dynamics by showing a black teacher educating white students. The film was unique for its time and sparked conversations about education and race. It even led to reforms in schools in Britain and the U.S. The theme song, sung by Lulu, became a huge hit, topping the Billboard Hot 100 and selling over 1 million copies. After becoming Hollywood's first black leading man, Sidney Poitier took a bold step in 1972 by moving behind the camera. His directorial journey began with Buck and the Preacher, where he not only starred alongside Harry Belafonte and Ruby Dee, but also replaced the original director, Joseph Sargent. This film marked the start of an 18-year career as a director. While Buck and the Preacher didn't perform strongly at the box office, Poitier didn't give up. He directed A Warm December in 1973 and found his real strength in comedy with Uptown Saturday Night in 1974. This move wasn't just about changing his career. Poitier believed that true progress in Hollywood needed change behind the scenes, not just on the screen. His biggest success as a director came in 1980 with Stir Crazy. The comedy, starring Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, made history as the first film by a black director to earn over $100 million in North America. It was the 3rd highest grossing film of that year, behind 9 to 5 and The Empire Strikes Back. The story follows two friends wrongfully jailed for bank robbery, and Poitier's direction brought out their humor and chemistry, even under tough circumstances. Richard Pryor's struggle with cocaine addiction during filming made production challenging, but Poitier managed to capture comedic brilliance. The film sold more tickets than some modern blockbusters, cementing its place in history. Poitier wasn't just focused on acting and directing, he also worked to reshape Hollywood's structure. In 1969, he teamed up with Paul Newman and Barbra Streisand to create First Artists Production Company. This company gave stars creative control by trading high salaries for a share of the profits and decision-making power. Later, Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman joined, agreeing to make films within a $3 million budget while staying on schedule. Although First Artists expanded into distribution and other ventures under CEO Phil Feldman, it closed in 1980 after facing financial struggles. Sidney Poitier's love story with Joanna Shimkus began in 1969, when they met on the set of The Lost Man, where they played love interests. After divorcing his first wife, Juanita Hardy, in 1965, Poitier and Shimkus married in January 1976. Their wedding was small and intimate, with their two daughters as flower girls and Harry Belafonte standing as best man. Their relationship stood out in Hollywood not just for its 45-year longevity, but also for navigating the challenges of being an interracial couple during a difficult time in American history. Shimkus, originally from Nova Scotia, Canada, once said she didn't see Poitier as a black man, but as an amazing human being. Their home in Beverly Hills reflected their love for travel, filled with antiques, but also welcoming for children, with Shimkus creating a space where kids could even play with crystal. She believed the secret to their lasting marriage was simple: cooking for him every night and taking good care of him. Sidney Poitier's family legacy is just as remarkable as his career. He was a father to 6 daughters, 4 from his first marriage to Juanita Hardy, and 2 with Joanna Shimkus. His daughters each found their own path in life. Beverly became a jewelry designer, Sherry a chef, while Pamela and Sidney followed him into acting. Annika, the youngest, became a filmmaker, directing notable projects like Black Irish. Tragically, one daughter, Gina, passed away in 2018 at age 57. Poitier was known to be a little strict with his children when it came to values, wanting them to grow up with strong principles. He often said that his family, his wife, children, 8 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, meant the most to him. Despite the demands of his career, he made it clear that they were his greatest priority. In addition to his acting and family life, Poitier played a crucial role in the civil rights movement. In 1964, he and Harry Belafonte embarked on a dangerous mission to Mississippi during Freedom Summer. They carried $70,000 in cash to support voting rights efforts, risking their lives when armed Ku Klux Klan members chased them while leaving Greenwood. Poitier's activism extended beyond moments like this. He attended the 1963 March on Washington, supported protests honoring James Meredith, the first black student at the University of Mississippi, and was present at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral in 1968. His commitment to civil rights also shaped his career choices. Poitier refused to take roles that reinforced racial stereotypes, famously declaring in 1967 that he would not compromise his principles. His work broke barriers, including his historic 1964 Academy Award win for Best Actor, which coincided with the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Sidney Poitier didn't just inspire audiences, he paved the way for future generations of black actors. Denzel Washington, who grew up watching Poitier's films, often cites him as a major inspiration. In a memorable encounter backstage after a play, Poitier encouraged a young Washington saying, "You know, you're good." This simple compliment gave Washington the confidence to pursue acting seriously. Poitier's influence wasn't limited to individuals. The roles he popularized in the 1950s and 1960s laid the groundwork for the more diverse and sometimes confrontational portrayals of Black life that emerged in the 1970s during the Blaxploitation era. Later generations of Black actors, including Morgan Freeman, Samuel L. Jackson, and Angela Bassett, also saw Poitier as a role model. Directors like Spike Lee credited him with breaking barriers, inspiring Lee to pursue filmmaking, and even cast Poitier in a small role in his 1991 movie, Jungle Fever. In 2002, Poitier's legacy came full circle at the Academy Awards. Denzel Washington, who was presenting him with an honorary Oscar, paid tribute by highlighting how Poitier had transformed the industry. He said, "Before Sidney, African-American actors had to take supporting roles. But you couldn't cut Sidney Poitier out of a Sidney Poitier picture. He was the reason a movie got made." That same night, Washington won the Best Actor Oscar for his role in Training Day, becoming only the second Black man to win that award, 38 years after Poitier. Sidney Poitier's legacy went beyond his performances. He actively worked to bring more diversity to Hollywood. In 1969, he insisted that half the crew for his film The Lost Man be Black, a groundbreaking demand at the time. His career, which spanned over 5 decades, was marked by a constant push for better representation of Black stories and talent in the film industry. By the time of his death in 2022, Poitier had become a symbol of dignity, excellence, and progress in Hollywood.